Hello, welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing my 25.7 mid lane Tierlist serve. Draw content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of changes to this patch. Most notably, we saw a buff to Yone, we saw a change to Xerath, and then we saw a nerf to Neferi, followed it up by a hotfix nerf to Neferi, and then some other things shifting on the mid lane, including the likes of Roa being buffed, which is a pretty heavy one, considering a lot of the champions which are performing quite well at the moment were already opting into this item. Let's get into it. So the D tier is going to consist of the same four champions. We have Smolder, Tristana, Corki, and Mel. In the case of Smolder and Tristana, these champions I've discussed about quite heavily at this point. They have suffered from past changes received to try and encourage them to be played primarily in the bot lane. It's been successful for the most part. Both these champions have seen a lot of their audience and a lot of their competitive games start beginning to shift towards the bot lane. They still do see mid lane play from time to time in specific matchups, and Tristana, especially in the current game, is definitely picking up a lot more traction. The Unitails plus IE build is really doing well and has definitely given her a lot of power. Still, for solo queue, she does underperform. These champions are mostly used as catalysts for AP junglers. Having an AD mid laner can definitely support them, and Tristana and Smolder are two of these champions. Corki's the third. Not performing very well in the mid lane anymore. This champion has been nerfed a couple of times. He was obviously overperforming primarily in the bot lane, being a very oppressive early game bully, combined with having great wave clip, gave him a lot of power, especially in competitive. That is a decent amount of the tools they really value, and just having that tagged slightly has definitely dropped him down, especially with the mid lane. He was already underperforming slightly before that. In the case of Mel, champion's been in a pretty rough spot for a while now. This pick has definitely suffered from direct changes to her kit. They lowered her range on her Q, combined with other direct changes, making the W less consistent. They just wanted some power siphoned out of that. This pick has definitely has been needing buffs, I'd say, for the last two patches. Maybe we'll see something going into 25.8, but for the moment, she's definitely one of the picks I would recommend avoiding. Ludens, if it gets buffed, would end up being a pretty solid option on her, but Ludens is in a relatively weak spot at the moment, and she has definitely suffered from that. Dropping down from the C tier to the D tier is Ziggs. Ziggs has felt unsupported in the mid lane for a while. Riot have definitely been more hesitant buffing and adjusting this champion, especially with how dominant he can be in competitive, especially within the bot lane. Direct changes towards the end of last year, hurting his sieging potential, took him out of the meta for the most part. He hasn't really been performing great in general across the board in both roles. In mid though, he's just been gradually declining. He really suffers from Ludens also being a pretty bad item at the moment. Other champions also benefited from Roa being buffed this patch, and Ziggs lost out there. He drops on the C tier to the D tier. He is a pick I would recommend avoiding for the moment. Moving on to the C tier, then I lead off with Azir. His pick is definitely in a very good spot at the moment. He is one of the highest prior mid laners in competitive. He has obviously been in weaker spots for solo queue, but now he's been buffed a couple of times. He's definitely benefited from those changes. They've obviously over time also incentivized him to be more of this auto attack centric mage within the mid lane. They were obviously quite aware back along when the Q harass kind of Azir place that was really dominant and competitive. That has been obviously shifted and taken out for a while now, but his current iteration is performing really well. He scales incredibly well. He's one of the best AP mage DPS options in the late game, and definitely a pick I would recommend playing if you want to play someone with a very high skill ceiling. But I would also recommend avoiding him for average play and just climbing in general, because he is a very hard champion to pilot. He's not a great option for solo queue, as you don't really have the same levers as you would in competitive. You're not going to get the same level of control, and people aren't going to give you the resources you really need. And for that, he definitely suffers. He sits as more like a C tier pick. Case of Gangplank, he's also very hard to play. Performs fine in mid lane. He's an okay option here. We've seen some AP Gangplank variations pop up, obviously primarily just spearheaded by solo backer. That being said though, I don't think they're particularly good. They're going to be conditional. You should primarily just be playing ADGP if you are playing him in the mid lane, but recent buffs combined with just an overall shift to the champion, trying to push him back to being a optional competitive pick has definitely helped him, and yeah, he sits more like a C-tier option at the moment. Still a pick I'd recommend avoiding. Maybe if you're on OTP vote, you can play him in the mid lane every so often. In the case of Brand, it's just because he's easy to play and has good innate wave clear. That is the strength of the champion. He's good in low elo, bad in high elo. Not a pick I'd really recommend playing, but an option there for you at the moment. Jace, very hard AD mid laner to play, but another really good option. Jace, combined with Yasuo and Yone, make up what I'd consider 3 of the main pool options for AD mids. They are like the picks you can play along your AP junglers. They are going to be better when you go high and into competitive. Jace, I think, is a great option, and if you can master him, very powerful pick to have within your arsenal. Not a pick I'd really recommend for average elos, though, as yeah, he is a very hard pick to pilot and needs a lot of resources to be quite valuable within the game. And Bessa is an option, which I have actually removed at this point. I'll leave Ambessa in for the moment, though. She's definitely gotten weaker over time, especially for mid lane. General shifts and like buffs towards some of the AP items have hurt her, as she is going to be playing traditionally into his mages. She can still work really nicely as a mid lane option. I think if you play her in the top lane and you want her as a flex pick, kind of like the GP and the Jace to an extent, Ambessa can be a good option here. She is just weaker at the moment. Direct nerf combined with shift in kind of the mage landscape has left her in a weaker spot, and there are other better AD options I would recommend over her at the moment. Aurora, a great competitive option, doesn't perform great in solo queue though, tends to be a bit on the weaker side. Also another champion suffering from Lunars being a bit weaker, but if you are very comfortable playing the pick, she can definitely still 1v9 games. You just need to accelerate yourself and be consistently rotating the combos, which I would argue can be easier in the top lane with champions with less mobility, and where you're more likely, you're going to be like in combat with them for extended periods of time. That is definitely one of the weaknesses of this champion in the mid lane, but she can be really good if you put a lot of time into her. Case of LeBlanc, she obviously lost a lot of win rate this patch. The ASU, well, I mean, it's very nice. It's definitely made the champion look a lot more appealing compared to what she was beforehand, where I'd say the model was like 10, 12 years old at that point. Having these ASUs to the likes of, LeBlanc, Caitlyn, Lee Sin, have really helped them, and definitely LeBlanc benefited from just having those changes. That being said, they weren't like direct balance changes, and yeah, new players playing the champion is going to result in a win rate loss. She is going to be played by people who haven't played her before, and not performed well on. So LeBlanc lost a lot of win rate this patch, doesn't affect her directly in balance framework, I guess, and sits as a remaining C-tier option. Still a pick I would recommend avoiding unless you are very comfortable with the champion and very good at taking over the games, using and utilizing and accelerating this pick's early game strengths. In the case of Twisted Fate, he has gained popularity. He's in fact one of the more popular mid laners now, which is interesting to see. Obviously he got directly buffed, combined with the Roa changes helping him. He's still a pick I'd recommend avoiding at the moment. I don't think he's quite there. I think he needs a slight bit more to really be more like a B, A tier option, but he definitely sits towards the high end of the C tier. Gragas also sits within the C tier at the moment. He is a option, like a flex option, if you want to play him top and have him as like a mid pick within your arsenal. He can be decent. He can obviously be built as like an AP bruiser. Tank Gragas isn't great at the moment. I'd recommend avoiding that, but you can also play him like a burst mage, and he should be relatively successful if you are comfortable with champion. If you're playing him like relatively fresh, I would recommend other things. I don't think Gragas is in the greatest spot he's been in for a while. Moving up into the B tier, we are going to lead off with Zoe, who is suffering from Ludens being a weaker item. She also was going to receive some changes, which then got ripped out of the patch because they wanted to look in a different direction, trying to enable her to have some level of wave clear without making her too oppressive. She could I mean, she also suffered from thrower champions being buffed, and yeah, she sits as a low B tier, high C tier option at the moment. A pick I wouldn't really recommend learning. I'd definitely wait and see what changes Riot have planned for her in 25.8 or maybe onwards, depending on when they pushed it back towards. Karma, I've removed. People aren't playing Karma mid anymore. It's a fine option. I'll talk about it briefly. The 10 damage she lost on Q was meaningful, and it really hurt her pick rate in both solo lanes. I think it was the wrong direction for them to like nerf her. The main thing, which obviously support Karma is really benefiting from at the moment, is her Enchanter Emax variant, which is, I mean, it's better for her ban rate, if anything, because she is not going to be as oppressive like as an AP like harass mage early on to the game, but is going to definitely scale a lot better and be a very oppressive pick if you are unable to like access things like serpents against her. She sits as a B2 option, high C2 option in mid lane, a pick which I would recommend only using as a flex option, but can be good in those in the correct spots. Case of Hui, they arguably over nerfed him. I think he's also suffering from Ludens being weak, but can definitely go Black Fire Torch and still perform quite well. It just comes down to, are you comfortable with the champion? That will be, and like what spots you want to play him in. I don't think he's terrible. I just think he is considerably weaker, and definitely probably slightly overswung on compared to what maybe Riot were aiming for. Don't like Aesop that much at the moment. He is primarily obviously targeted to be good around like average to low elo audiences. He scales incredibly well. That is like the biggest strength of the champion, but he has an incredibly weak laning phase, and I think there are just a lot of other options which I would recommend over him, which don't quite have the same level of burden. Malzahar, for example, I will really push as like an option in his current state. ASO I think is just slightly on the weaker side, but if you are comfortable playing these like battle mages, then he can be a very good option for you. In the case of Zed, he got buffed more recently, and it really benefited him. He sits alongside the likes of Talon, Akshan as like pretty solid AD assassin mid laners. If you are comfortable playing them, they can be really good picks for your arsenal. If you're not, you do have to put time into playing these champions. You're not going to be instantly successful off the get-go. They are hard picks to play and pilot well on. Same goes for Kiana. She's another champion which kind of lingers with these three. They're all good AD options if you put the time into them. If you don't put the time into them, then you should look elsewhere and into other AD options. Sion is a pretty solid tank pick. I have him towards the low end of the B tier. I think he is just a conditional flex, and can be really good for drafts if you do need a tank. Same goes for Malphite into heavy AD compositions, can come out and be a really solid pick. You can also obviously play him as an AP mage in the mid lane, which can be good in specific matchups, but usually only very specific scenarios. Most of the time you do just want to play him as tank Malphite, and just be that front line and be the anti-AD champion which you want to be in some of those situations. Some of your AP assassins are the likes of Katarina, Fizz, Kassadin. I think Katarina and Fizz are very good in specific matchups. In the case of Katarina, she really bounces around the tier list depending on just how good you are at her. If you are first time Katarina, this champion is terrible. If you put a huge amount of games into Katarina, she can be a really effective way of climbing. In the case of Fizz, he is primarily a good counter pick option. Outside of that, I wouldn't really be recommending the champion, but he can still be good if you do once again have a lot of games on him. Kassadin is another pick which I'd only really recommend in counter pick scenarios, but another champion where if you've put a lot of games into him can be really valuable. Rise sits as a B2 option, probably a high B2 option. Both these two picks really benefited from Roa being buffed, which is why I don't have them as like low B2 picks anymore. But yeah, if you're very comfortable playing Rise, you're very comfortable playing Kassadin, I definitely think these champions are substantially better. And Roa and Catalyst curving a lot better in its build path has really benefited them, so definitely be aware that these champions are stronger and better in more situations than previously. Other picks within the beta include the likes of Lissandra and Akali. I think Lissandra, another really good counter pick option, also kind of suffering from Ludens being a pretty bad item at the moment. If it got buffed, I could definitely see her rising back up to the A tier, but as of now, she is a good, solid counter pick option. I think Akali, a great AP assassin, a pick I would always recommend learning or just having within your arsenal. I think this champion can be really good in a lot of situations and can be a very solid flex option if you are looking for an AP assassin to play in the top lane. Moving on to the A tier then, we lead off with Yone. Yone obviously received the E and the Q change this patch. He no longer has the passive nerf to crit damage, which Yasuo also lost recently. But they also removed the E CC invulnerability when basically if you get stunned or CC'd and then you snap back in your E, you will no longer be instantly able to move. You will suffer from the CC afterwards, or like for the remaining duration of the CC timer. It's really meaningful in high elo and competitive. In most elo brackets though, you are not going to notice this. You will play most of your games without really feeling this change. Into hard CC compositions, it will definitely be more noticeable and you will have a high chance of suffering from this kind of a change. But the passive change is massive. He scales incredibly well now. I mean, he already scaled really well, but this just amplifies it to a greater extent. And for average play, low elo, I think this pick is doing a lot better. Definitely very deserving of an A tier spot. Could possibly over time jump to the S tier. He is arguably one of the premier AD options at the moment, but I do think both Yasuo and Neferi are very strong competitors, and Yone sits as an A tier option, but the other two still worth looking at, which I'll talk about in a second. In the case of Silas, he's fine. I think he's mostly relegated to a counter pick at the moment, but in the right spots, this champion can be incredibly powerful. Just don't blind him. I think he can definitely lose a lot of value as a blind pick. A pick which, is kind of relegated to a counter option at the moment. Nico, incredibly unpopular in the mid lane. It's really unfortunate. Obviously, she's played mostly as a support, but in the right spots in mid lane, or not even right spots, just generalistically, she has a very oppressive early game, and her snare can be really valuable. Her team fighting can be really strong with that ultimate. She has a lot of things going for her. I just think her unpopularity kind of makes it hard to really look at what kind of things work best on her, and she also suffers from some of the itemization just not being as good for her in her current state compared to some of the other mid lane mages. In the case of Vex, she's a great counter pick option, and that's the strength of the champion. Into high mobility comps, Vex really shines as a pick. You just play her in counter pick spots, and she should be a very solid champion for your arsenal. In the case of Orianna, she is one of the better just traditional mages. I think this pick can be really powerful if paired alongside an engaged jungler. Getting like loads of value out of your ultimate is one of the key things of this champion, but just like spacing an early laning phase, making sure you're weaving autos. There's a lot of depth to this pick, and I really do respect the idea of like mastering Orianna and just making having her as like one of the main like foundation champions in your pool. I think she's really valuable for that. Moving on from Orianna, we have Talia. Great anti-mobility, short-range mage. She has access to a lot of damage, like level 9 onwards. When you get like your item spikes, she can struggle a bit earlier on into the game. Her roams have definitely been nerfed over time, making it so she can't just effectively shove in the wave and roam. But once you get access to that level 9, having a lot of damage on your Q, she can definitely kind of fall back to her play pattern if that's kind of like the way you want to play her. In general, though, I think she's a very solid pick at the moment, very deserving of an A tier spot. Heimerdinger and Quinn are two niche options. They're both primarily, I believe Heimerdinger is played mostly in the top lane at the moment. Obviously, he's been played support, he's been played mid lane, he's been played in the top lane. He has access to incredible wave clear, incredible amounts of damage. He is played almost entirely by OTPs, and if you're very comfortable with this champion, I think he can still be an excellent pick at the moment. In the case of Quinn, she really benefited from direct buffs to a lot of her itemization and she has found herself in a very solid spot in the mid lane, very deserving A tier option. Sits next to the likes of Garen, who definitely suffered from the direct nerf to his crit damage modifier on his E, hurting items like Phantom Dancer, Infinity Edge, Mortal Reminder, LDR when you opt into them, and encouraging picking up some bruiser options again if you're maybe playing into some of these AD compositions, then something like a Dead Man's Third can be a very solid option on him. In the case of Annie, she's actually been performing a lot better as of recent, very much a solid A tier pick. Her summon is incredibly powerful, her point and click CC, her wave clear isn't amazing, but pretty trivialized by that Q, and yeah, I think as a pick, she's definitely been on the rise as of the moment, a very solid A tier option. Aurelia, a very hard to play AD pick, but if you can play her well, she is an incredibly powerful champion to have at the moment. She's incredibly impressive early on to the game, spiking really hard on Bork and Hullbreaker, and then being able to take over the games on those 2 item spikes is like the core kind of like principle of this champion. If you fall behind, you will really struggle, and that is why I recommend only playing her if you put a lot of time into her already. If you're not willing to put the time into her, then I'd probably recommend trying things like the Pantheon and the Neferi. I think there are lots of good AD options accessible to you at the moment. And yeah, Pantheon, great as a counter pick for AD options. Neferi, in general, is just very strong at the moment. Her W is an incredibly powerful spell. She has obviously been nerfed quite heavily, and her mid lane power has definitely, and jungle power has definitely suffered a bit from it. Over time, though, as people refine builds and like relearn the champion, I think she'll definitely rise back up as a good option. So I would still recommend Neferi as a pick at the moment, but yeah, definitely not as powerful as she once was. Some of the other A tier options include some of the artillery picks I like to recommend. The likes of Vel'Koz, Xerath, and Lux are really good artillery options. In the case of Vel'Koz and Xerath, in the case of Vel'Koz, he got buffed not too long ago. The change really helped him, solidified him as a very solid mid lane option. In the case of Lux, she has incredible wave clear, incredible burst potential, pretty underrated mid lane option. In the case of Xerath, he received a bunch of adjustments / changes this patch. 5% AP ratio up on the Q combined with some base damage nerfs across the kit for some other compensation AP ratio buffs. He kind of ended up being relatively neutral. I don't think they kind of landed where they maybe wanted him to land. If he got slightly buffed in 25.8, I think that could really solidify Xerath as a very solid mid lane option. For now, though, he kind of stays in a similar spot. He scales better, but is just slightly weaker early on into the game. Echo really benefited from the direct buffs to Halo Blades, Electric Q, and a buff to his outgoing Q damage, I believe it was. And yeah, has found himself as a very solid A tier AP option in the mid lane at the moment. Veigar is Veigar and Kayle are great low elo options. These picks scale incredibly well. If you can give them access to levels and gold, they are 2 of the best scalers in the game. Kayle, really powerful, underrated as a mid lane option. Veigar definitely suffers the higher up you go, but in low elo he still is usually allowed to scale to the point where he can one-shot most targets, and yeah, is in a very solid spot at the moment. In the case of Victor, he is a great mid-game mage. He doesn't scale quite as well as some of the other AP options, albeit he can still scale relatively well. The main kind of value out of the Victor is just how oppressive he can be in lane, having access to things like Shield Bash combined with, just the Q power. Does make him incredibly potent, and if you can convert those advantages, I think this pick can be very, very solid at the moment. Swain is an incredible counter pick option. In the current state of the game, he can absorb so much damage, and if you play him into like short range compositions, I think this pick can be just outright one of the best in the game. I think you should really look for those spots if you do have Swain as a pick within your arsenal. Some of the other champions here include the likes of Yasuo, who is my recommended AD pick at the moment. The buff he received not too long ago has just enabled him to really shine as a AD option. If you've put the time into him, you probably know just how strong the pick is. It's not really like hidden OP. He is just played by most people. I believe he's the second most popular mid laner in the game, and yeah, I think it's rightfully so. This pick is incredibly good in his current state. Diana, also doing a lot better at the moment. One of the strongest AP lane bullies in the game. I think people really misunderstand where the strength of Diana comes from. And yeah, if you can push those advantages early on to the game, I think this pick is incredibly good at the moment. Vladimir is an addition to the S tier. I think Vladimir over time has been really on the rise, opting into things like Cosmic, Riftmaker, Rabadon. This pick can output huge amounts of damage if he gets access to like free scaling lanes. You can even find isolated solo kills in lane if you like put him in the right matchup. I think Vladimir has really benefited from just changes around him and is very solid as an S tier option in his current state. Galio, which is missing since it's an S tier option. This pick, I still think is an incredible counter pick. He probably sits towards the lower end of the S tier. I think his like dominance isn't quite as high as it once was, but as a counter pick option, definitely solidified as an S tier. Main thing to be concerned of at the moment is you can't blind Galio. There are too many AD picks which are just really performing quite well at the moment, and he has definitely suffered from a lot of those kind of like coming into the meta. I believe that's probably why his win rate is definitely substantially down compared to where it was maybe 2-3 patches ago. But yeah, just use him as a counter pick, and I still think this champion maintains a spot within the S tier. Some of the picks which benefited from Roa being buffed are Cassiopeia and Rise. These champions were already very good. Cassiopeia great into short range compositions, she can kite out. Anivia great into compositions which can't really entertain like playing or like working around her wall and her ultimate. These tools are great control abilities, and most champions, or like a lot of champions, struggle to kind of operate against that. In the case of Syndra, I still recommend playing her like haste variant. The Blackfire Cosmic build just gives her access to so many rotations of abilities, consistent pick potential with the E, very like high amounts of uptime with the ultimate, just enable her to be a really solid pick, which I can recommend at the moment. My two other S tier picks are Cho'Gath and Malzahar. Malzahar, for just how powerful as of a low elo option he is always going to be a recommend. He trivializes wave clear, he has very sharp item spikes, scales incredibly well, it's very hard to interact with, and very solid in the S tier for that reason. In the case of Cho'Gath, it's not, it's actually relatively similar. It's relatively non-interactive laning phase. His passive traditionally is enough power to kind of just mitigate most damage mages will have against him. He can, once you get to like 900 gold, back onto Symbiotic Souls, and then just use that movement speed to roam around the map, shove out waves, and just be an incredibly good like pick for that kind of playstyle. The other thing with Cho'Gath is the scaling. He scales incredibly well, can act as a huge health pool. If you opt into things like Kaenic Rukun and Deadmans, then he can act as a pseudo tank as well, and he's a very, very powerful S tier pick for that. And Ari is my premier S plus option. She is the pick I recommend playing this patch. The buff towards Roa, when the Roa build was already performing so well on her, has just enabled her to be the best mid lane option. She is being adjusted next patch. I believe Riot have already specified that, so play it whilst you can. She is my recommended champion pick of the patch. Those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.